You only have your thoughts and dreams ahead of you. You're someone. You mean something. I'll remember. You're within me now. Forever. Today on the Comic Book Report, Batman Black and White Omnibus. Stick around and check it out. Greetings from Gotham, everyone. My name is Dominic, and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today, I'm kicking off the new year with a Batman Omnibus. Of course, today we're talking about Batman Black and White. This is such an unusual collection, and I can't wait to dive into today's review. But before we do, just a quick shout out to our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link to it in the video description. If you find something you like, you can even use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support this channel. Thank you so much for considering, and now, without further ado, let's get started. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written and illustrated by so many comic book creators. I don't want to take all the time to list them all today, but some of my favorites in this collection include Neil Adams, Brian Bolland, Dustin Nguyen, Cliff Chiang, Bill Sienkiewicz, Mike Mignola, Gene Colan, Michael Allred, Lee Bermejo, and so many more. The comics in this volume were first published by DC Comics beginning in 1996. The volume itself collects Batman Black and White, Volume 1, Issues 1 through 4, Volume 2, Issues 1 through 6, and material from Batman Gotham Knights, Issues 1 through 49. Today's collection is an oversized hardcover edition with nice glossy print paper stock, a glued binding, and a total of 800 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that Batman Omnibus we'll be talking about today, Batman Black and White. And yes, this is one of the most striking dust jacket designs I have in my collection. I am such a sucker for this black and white just look to it. It is gorgeous. I have another omnibus I actually got recently, the Mark Spector Moon Knight Omnibus Volume 1. It does something similar, which just this striking black and white, the crisp contrast, it just looks so good. I love seeing that Jim Lee Batman on the front. Even the font choice I just think is excellent. On the spine of this collection, it's more of the same. We have some amazing font choices, a black spine with white text that just pops out. We have the DC logo and a little bit of a Batman face at the top. It just looks really good on the bookcase. I really think that they did a stellar job with this dust jacket. Another unusual thing about this collection, on the back cover, I will note that instead of giving like issue thumbnails, we have these little thumbnail snapshots of some of the artistic talent showcased in this volume. And again, it just scratches the surface because there are so many stories. But I love the idea of this to sell the book because you get to see just a little snippet of some of the many, many art styles throughout this book. Really a great idea. I love just really simple language on the back of this book, some pricing information, but again, I really love the dust jacket. And speaking of that dust jacket, you've seen the interior flaps now. I'm going to spread it out so you can just see everything at a glance. We'll take one more quick look at this dust jacket, and then we'll go ahead and transition to looking at the hardcover book itself and the art we have printed on this collection. I will say the hardback art we get printed on the book itself, while it's very striking, we have kind of two different faces of Batman on the front and back of the hardback, and then the spine is basically reproduced with all the information. I do like what they did. It's again black and white, but I think you could have almost found even more striking imagery for the hardback book itself. But still a really beautiful collection. Really like the presentation from DC Comics. And here's that hardback book spread open for you to see it all at a glance. A really beautiful looking collection. This is really a standout in a Batman collector's library as far as I'm concerned. I'll definitely go into that a bit more, but this is a very different kind of book. And now I want to spend a moment talking about this book's binding. As I mentioned at the top, it is a glued binding. I can actually see a little bit of the glue coming out of the bottom of my book, but doesn't affect the binding at all as far as I'm concerned. It's still a pretty solid binding. I don't feel like the gutter loss was too terrible throughout this book. Yes, there were times I had to flatten down the pages a bit and kind of spread them open a little bit more. Would have loved to seen this with a sewn binding, but hey, it's still pretty good. I had no issues with mine. And now as we transition into the book proper, we have some beautiful end pages, title page, publication information, and then one of my favorite features of a good omnibus, a full table of contents. And this thing is a thing of beauty. Yes, this table of contents goes on for several pages because it perfectly indexes, maps, gives us a page number and creator information for each and every story present in this omnibus, which frankly is a huge undertaking. Yes, it's only 800 pages, but the stories themselves are maybe 5 to 8 pages long on average. They're shorter stories, so we have just a huge amount of stories in this collection. It's something else. Love to see that table of contents. After that, I know we have a bit of a foreword before jumping right into some of the stories. Once upon a time, I did have the first trade paperback collection for Batman Black and White, and I believe that this omnibus starts with those stories at the front. The first story in this collection is actually one of my favorite Batman stories of all time. It's really a beautiful and haunting story of Batman conducting kind of an autopsy in a morgue to try to get down to the bottom of who murdered this young woman, and it's just this really beautiful kind of reflective moment where he says that this victim will be with him forever, and he tries to find justice for her. It's really just, like I said, a haunting story, but really beautiful, and you get to see just some of the compassion of Batman. It's really just moving, and in only a couple pages, I'm really impressed. But yeah, we just go from story to story, and we have so many different creative teams. Yes, sometimes a writer and artist are one and the same in this collection. They pull double duty, but for the most part, these stories are written by one or two individuals and illustrated by one or two individuals, and story to story, we just cycle through. As far as the subject matter here too, it really varies. Yes, it's all Batman stories, but some of them are like Golden Age throwback stories. Some of them are kind of punk rock, alternative, interesting, edgy. Some of them are humorous, like in the case of a couple different Harley and Ivy storylines. Some are crime noir. Some are more just art pieces more than anything else functionally. But really the quality varies, but we have just so much as far as the breadth of what's included here. It should be noted, in case it wasn't abundantly clear, this is a black and white comic collection. There is no color in this book beyond one storyline that also utilizes a really deep red. Yes, there's one story that is black, white, and red, and that story just jumps right off the page. It's so striking because everything else here is black and white, but I find that as I go through, I really don't miss that color. I think because these stories are designed to be in black and white, these artists really take advantage of the lighting, the silhouettes, the shadow work, and the perspective we get in so many of these stories is just really groundbreaking and impressive. I also think because Batman works so well as a gritty, more noir, old school, timeless character, having these stories in black and white, it almost leaves me unfazed. I think the production quality on this omnibus is also just quite good throughout. The paper stock is nice and glossy, it's not thin as far as I'm concerned, and all of the artist's artwork just pop right from the page. And we have such varied styles, as I mentioned earlier. We have kind of the Bruce Timm looking really hyper animated style, and then we have someone like Alex Ross or Lee Bermejo, which are much more on that realistic painted look, and we have everything in between. We have Mike Allred, as I mentioned, Mike Mignola, so many of the industry greats throughout this book. It's really just staggering. I will say, reading this end to end, there were points where I just began to skim read this a bit because there's just so much storytelling here. But they still left a huge impression on me. There's some I really took my time with to just savor each and every word, and some you just kind of glance and keep moving as far as it just being more of an art piece. I've never really read a collection exactly like this before. It is very much a selection of vignettes, or an anthology series, I should say, but we don't have any overarching frame narrative. There's not like one distinct story arc. This is not a creator run or really telling one big story. It's just all of these little snippets or Batman stories. There's really no central theme or idea either. It's just each of these creators have their own voice, their own story to tell. They have a few pages to tell it, and you just get lost in these different short stories, and the only unifying factor is that it is Batman related. Yes, we have lots of different interpretations of Gotham, Batman, the Bat family, some supporting heroes like Superman, a huge ton of villains, things like that, but it is really just a fascinating read. I know I read and reviewed something on my channel not too long ago, that Superman Bizarro World collection. That was another sequence of just sort of short stories that had a loose frame narrative, but this is nothing like that as far as I'm concerned. I think for me that was more of an absurdist collection, and while there are some absurd entries in this book, for the most part these are functional narrative stories with pretty solid plot lines as a generality, and you could read just all of these little Batman adventures. If you're a fan of the Caped Crusader, I just about guarantee that some of the storylines explored here will just fit your fancy. I know for me, there's this aspect too that we get to see all of the different facets of Batman on display here. Like I said, we have the kind of campy 60s era Batman, we have this old school Golden Age Avenger kind of character, we have the gritty detective noir side of him, and some he's really just in the periphery, and we follow other characters like Harley Quinn or Robin or whomever, but I really just dug it. Like I said, it really leaves an impression on you. My biggest word of caution is just understanding what you're getting with a collection like this. And what do I mean by that? First of all, it's in black and white. For people out there who only like comics in color, just be aware this book might not be for you. If you can overlook that, the second thing I would just say is that this is a collection of short stories with no overarching narrative, as I mentioned earlier. This isn't like a creator-driven comic book run or other omnibus that has like kind of one continuous story, or like, hey, this is Batman issue 1, this is issue 2, and we have kind of a sequential feeling to it. No, this is a scattershot of just small short stories. And because of that, it can feel, I don't want to say aimless, but it's almost like you can enjoy each story in and of itself. So it's not easy to really burn through this cover to cover necessarily. You're not following one big storyline. It's like you can take this off your shelf, enjoy a few stories, put it back, and come back for your next adventure another time. Because of that, I really consider this a collection to be savored. I think also it is very art heavy. I am very impressed with some of the plot lines. They're by no means any less intricate, and the fact that you can have it with such brevity with only a couple pages and have some of these stories pop so tremendously, it has to be absolutely commended. But still, this feels like it leans a little bit more on the art than the plot. And that's something else to be noted here. If you love comic book art, this is another great collection to get because you have just a fantastic showing of some of the industry's top professionals at your fingertips. Expounding on that point a bit more, one of the other things about this book I really enjoyed, when I first read the collection in trade paperback, the first few issues of it, I found a couple stories I liked, but I didn't really pay attention to the creators necessarily. But now that I've read so many more comics over the years, I find myself being really interested in who wrote this, who illustrated this. And if I didn't look it up beforehand, sometimes I'll look kind of toward the end of the story or what have you to really just savor like, oh wow, this is who brought this. And there's some styles that are immediately recognizable that I could point out right away, and there are others that were relatively unknown to me that I discovered in this book that I now want to keep tabs on. And I think why that's so cool is that whether you're breaking into comics for the first time or you're kind of a seasoned comic book reader, consumer, I think that there's so much as far as who was brought to the table for this project that I think it's really easy to come away finding new comic creators you might be a fan of with a book like this. Like I said, just seeing so many different styles on display, both narratively but also in the illustrations, it was really fun just finding more creators I really enjoyed. I know for one example, Cliff Chiang. That's an artist and a writer that I've come to really like more and more over the years. I thoroughly enjoyed his run on Wonder Woman with Brian Azzarello. I enjoyed what I've read of Paper Girls as well, which he illustrated, and then I loved Catwoman, Lonely City, which he both wrote and illustrated. And I noticed he had a story in this collection, and I looked at it with fresh eyes because now this is a creator I just recently started to love, and lo and behold, he is present within this omnibus. And I feel like there are so many examples like that. Like I have some of my comic book favorites, and wow, they have an entry in this collection. It's so great as just a consumer of comic books, but also it just makes me absolutely impressed by the people that put this collection together. together. And there's actually a bit about that in the foreword to this collection that I actually thoroughly recommend people read if you pick up this omnibus, because I found it pretty illuminating. They definitely stressed this idea that this was a supreme effort to get everything in, to get it edited, to get it all together, and with coordinating with so many different creators and their schedules, things like that, I would imagine that this was a nightmare of an undertaking, and yet the total that we get here, this entire product, it is something else. Like I said, this really stands out from a lot of the other books in my collection, not just because it's been black and white, not just because it's short stories, but because just the breadth of what we get with this one book alone. I do think, again, it's better savored with a couple stories here and there, rather than something you burn through cover to cover. I would be curious if there's any Batman black and white fans out there, particularly if you're an owner of this omnibus. Did you burn through this? Did you read this really fast cover to cover, or was this something that you read a few stories here and there and would just check back in periodically? I would love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know on that. Anyway, going back to this, I will say I have a few Batman omnibuses that I've collected over the years. I know I've done Batman, Jeff Loeb, and Tim Sale. Last year, I got the Scott Snyder Greg Capullo run, finally in an oversized omnibus format. Yay. I got the Batman and Robin, Peter J. Tomasi, and Patrick Gleason omnibus. I got the Rise and Fall of the Batman, the Tinian Detective Comics era in omnibus. And then I think I have this one. So I don't have a ton. I know there's so many other Batman omnibuses out there. I have a lot of my Batman actually in just standard size paperbacks or hardcovers. But I'm starting to slowly amass more Batman omnibuses. This is one I was really excited to check out. Like I mentioned before this, I just had the first volume in paperback. So to say there was a lot more content I had never had an opportunity to read before this omnibus would be an understatement. This is a gigantic collection. And as you can see, just as we've been flipping through pages, I mean, I don't even have to say it, it's so redundant now, but just looking from page to page, there's just so many different styles. And the fact that you have them edging up right next to each other, it's just fascinating to read. As a reading experience, you can go from one style to the almost opposite artistic style in the next page. And I think that that keeps this collection feeling kind of fresh. You're always in for something new. I feel like even if you didn't enjoy a story or two stories, the next story is right around the corner and it could be your favorite. You know, or if you read a bunch that are amazing and then there's one that you feel is more of a dud, that's okay because there's another one coming. And that's how I felt kind of reading through this. I think that there is a little bit of a variety as far as the quality of the content, or at least what it's to taste. You know, I feel like I'm pretty accepting of a lot of different art styles, but there's some that just didn't work for me in this book, and that's okay. It might be someone else's favorite. And I do think because of that, that's both a strength to this book and maybe a detriment, because you might have collections in here that you're like, I just didn't like this whole section. Versus if you had a creator omnibus or a run, you might know, hey, I love Scott Snyder, I love Greg Capullo's art, no matter what throughout this run, I am going to be stoked. Versus here, it's like you don't really know what you're going to get. It's just a grab bag of so many. So that's something else to think about when evaluating a collection like this. I will say though that while there are some stories in here that maybe don't hit for me as much as they could for some others, or I didn't feel like were as strong, I do think that there are some narratives that are just top tier Batman writing. And yes, I feel that way even in this shorter 5 to 8 page format, even in this black and white format. Like I mentioned, the story that kicked off this collection with Batman and the girl in the morgue, or young woman in the morgue, that one just stays with me. That's been one of my favorite Batman stories for almost a decade now, and I can't stop thinking about it. I go back to it fondly just because I think the prose is so beautifully written, that internal narration just hits so hard, and because we get to see so much of Batman's compassion, because it's just him speaking to someone who's deceased, so it's almost like his own internal monologue. It's just a really striking piece of fiction, and there are so many other examples throughout this that I felt similarly. There's also some with Paul Dini or Bruce Timm, and so we get this kind of evocation of sort of the Batman animated series in many ways. I think that was really fun to visit because there's almost a nostalgia in some of the visual imagery there. I liked some of the humor in this omnibus. There are some cheeky moments with the Bat family, or between like Batman, Alfred, and Robin, for example, or as I've said earlier too, characters like Harley Quinn that show up, or the dynamics between Harley and Ivy. There's a couple funny instances of that. We get to see a lot of different takes at the Joker. Some are funny, some are grimdark and intense, and everything in between. Some just beautiful art to behold. Like Alex Ross's story in this book, it's easy to almost be distracted by what he's trying to say, or what that story's trying to say rather, because I'm just so preoccupied by the beautiful painted Batman art throughout this story. It's really just wow. As you'll probably notice, I'm not really speaking to specifics on too many stories here because, again, there's almost just too much to cover. I've shared a couple of my favorites here, but you'll have to read it to experience it for yourself. I'm just trying to give you more of an over quality for this omnibus in general, trying to showcase as much of the art as possible so that prospective buyers out there can get an idea of what you can expect with this book. To be fair, to balance out the review a bit more, I will say some things I don't love about it as well. I know I've mentioned a little bit briefly, but for me, I do think that this dragged a little bit because it was just a constant shuffling. Yes, there were times where that really felt fresh and exciting, but if you're trying to read this cover to cover, there's times where you're almost like, or at least for me, I was almost like, make it stop. You know, I'm ready for like a longer story arc, a longer narrative. In the same way that whenever I read too much short story or short fiction in general, sometimes I want to just crave a novel or something longer, a bigger story arc, bigger character development moments that I get to see hang out and build over time. And so when you read just nothing but these short stories, it leaves me just craving a little bit more. Again, that doesn't take away from the impact or the power of these short stories, because like I said, some of these Batman stories are my favorite Batman stories of all time. Yes, I've said it full stop. But at the same time, I could get a little bit tired or kind of fatigued reading a collection like this as an omnibus. In many ways, I felt like my trade paperbacks were a little bit more digestible. And yes, there's no reason why I couldn't stop and just take my time and go back to this when I wanted. But again, there's times wanting to read an omnibus, wanting to finish it out, and just feeling like what a chore this collection could sometimes be. Again, I just want to be fully transparent. That did factor into my reading experience of this book and of the size of this book. But in the end, I still think the good outweighed the bad for me. The pros definitely outshadowed the cons here, but I just wanted to give more of a balance on what I felt like reading this. Back here at the back of the omnibus, we actually have a healthy amount of extras, which I love to see. We get all of these different cool like cover art images, splash images. We get looks at the figures for Batman Black and White and some of the other bonus material here. I loved seeing this at the back of the omnibus. I think any omnibus should have extra bonus features like this. It's one of my favorite things, having these prestige hardcover editions, and frankly, this one didn't disappoint. I mean, just look at some of the bonus content we get in this book. Just some beautiful visuals here. I love that we even get a look at the merchandise. Like, how fun to get that a little bit behind the scenes. And as we make our way to the back here, that has been Batman Black and White. The good and the bad, everything in between. Again, I would be fascinated to hear from those who have collected this omnibus, or maybe the trades, or picked up just the backing issues that this is drawn from. If you're a fan of Batman Black and White, or you struggled with it, either way, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Overall, this is still a very striking, interesting collection, and I think all that's left to do now is to give Batman Black and White Omnibus a grade. For what I can only call a truly unforgettable Batman reading experience, showcasing probably the best array of comic book talent I've ever seen in a single volume omnibus, the Comic Book Report has to give Batman Black and White Omnibus a B. This is definitely an above average collection for me, and especially as a Batman collector, this is something that should be on my bookcase. I'm so happy it now is. I think this is best served just reading occasionally and just savoring each story as you go, rather than burning through it cover to cover. But to each their own, I would have recommended that to myself should I have kind of done this experience again. Love seeing all the different artists, loved reading all the stories. I couldn't believe some of the quality we got in just a few short pages per story. Really just wowed by that. But let me know what you think. Let me know what your thoughts are on this collection, this review. And again, thank you for watching. And until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave your like, your comment, and maybe share this video with a friend or watch one of my others. Thanks so much. Have a good one.